for joining. Welcome to the May 2024 meeting of the Washington County Water Consortium. My name is Adriana. I'm a planner with Washington County's Public Health and Environment Department. I, along with my colleague Angela from the Washington Conservation District, host this monthly meeting to gather public and private partners to share ideas, information, updates, and lessons learned on any and all topics under the umbrella of water resources. Our topic this month centers around climate change. We've got two great speakers today. We'll start this afternoon by hearing from Alexis Monti, Climate Resiliency Specialist with Wild Rivers Conservancy. Then we'll hear from Teresa Opheim, Executive Director of Climate Land Leaders. Before we get started this afternoon, I want to mention that if you have any topic ideas or have a presentation yourself, please feel free to reach out to either Angela or myself. We're always looking for new topics or ideas to share with the group. Also, as a reminder to everyone that if you are ever interested in viewing past consortium topics or presentations, these materials are archived on Washington County's Water Consortium website. Before we move to the presentations, does anyone have any announcements to share? Go ahead, Angie.
Hi, I always have things to share. I think almost all of you will get the MREP and Lower St. Croix education update that I'll be sending out in a couple of days, but we are going to have the registration open for the St. Croix Workshop on the Water Local Leaders series. And that is going to include this year a boat workshop on June 24th that will be departing on the Grand Duchess St. Croix River from Hudson. There will be a conservation tour in northern Washington County that is going to be hosted by the Washington Water Consortium. And going to be visiting Jackson Meadow, T-Gavo, and Kelly Farms. And then in September 30th, there will be a final workshop that is looking at conservation development and rural small communities, and that's going to be at a event venue up in Chisago County. So look for information about all of those. Oh no, as long as I've got the floor, we on May 21st are having a well water testing clinic that is going to be at the Hardwood Creek Library in Forest Lake. So that's one more thing for me to mention to this group, that if you or other constituents in your area are on well water, they can bring it by to get tested for nitrates and for chlorides. That clinic will be running from 1 until 6 p.m.
Thank you very much, Angie. Does anyone else have anything? Just feel free to come off mute if you do. Okay, hearing nothing else, without further delay, we will start with our first speaker, Alexis Monti, Climate Resiliency Specialist with Wild Rivers Conservancy, who will be telling us about taking action on climate change and preparing for the future. With that, I'll hand it over to Alexis.
Great, thank you so much. I'm just gonna share my screen real quick here, and please tell me if it doesn't look right on your end. I'm gonna put it in presenter mode. Okay, it looks good on my end. How does it look on yours?
It looks good. Yes.
Okay, looks good. Perfect. Okay, and then I'm just gonna, okay, and it still looks good. I just moved one slide. Amazing. Thank you so much. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm Alexis Monti, the Climate Resiliency Specialist at Wild Rivers Conservancy. I'm very excited to be talking to you all, and I hope you enjoy my presentation. But yes, this is taking action on climate change and preparing for the future. So the way I like to start this presentation is I like to just put us in a place, right? So Wild Rivers Conservancy works, we service the St. Croix watershed, which is pictured on the right. Since most of us work in Washington County or have some relation to Washington County, I assume most of us know about the St. Croix watershed, or at least work within it. So we service this whole area. There's a lot of really fun facts about it, which I'm going to go into really briefly, but it's about the size of New Jersey, roughly half in Minnesota and half in Wisconsin. And it includes the St. Croix and the Namaquagan River. It has a very high ecosystem value and is mostly forested. especially up in the northern section, less so in Washington County. 75% of the land is owned by private landowners. I see some private landowners here on this call today, so hello, so excited to see you here. And then it faces threats of climate change, fragmentation, and development. So this is kind of the St. Croix watershed as a whole, and ties a lot into my work. Most of the projections I'll go into in a minute are downscaled to specifically this watershed, or at least I summarize them for just the watershed. So that's just putting it in perspective. So climate change projections and impacts. So I've noticed that climate projections are not always super publicly accessible. They're really, really useful, but they often have a lot of numbers and jargon to them that make them kind of difficult to understand. So this first part of my presentation is just going over the projections for the St. Croix watershed, specifically on the Minnesota side. But before I go into the projections too hard, I just want to kind of get us all on the same page with projections, right? So this chart right here, we have temperature change in years. So the temperature is increasing over the years is what it's showing. And then it's got on the right side, this thing called RCPs, which we see right here, right? And so when I looked at this map, I was like, oh my, well, what is an RCP? I feel like most of us probably have thought that. And if you do know what it is, that's fantastic. I went to school for environmental science and climate, and I didn't know what this was until just recently. So what is it? Well, it's a representative concentration pathway, of course, which still does not sum up at all what the heck that is. So to break it down even further, a RCP is essentially a scenario. So it's a carbon scenario, right? So this is a situation in which the world is emitting certain amounts of carbon over time. So RCPs are generally divided into 4 of them. There's RCP 2.6, 4.5, 6.0, and 8.5, which you can see on this map. And essentially, they're all just different scenarios of how the world will react to climate change, how the world will kind of emit carbon over the next 100 or so years. So the way it kind of works is the lower the number for the RCP, the less carbon that we collectively as a society have emitted. And so it's just the scenario where we're taking action on climate change, we're switching to renewable energy, we are taking action. And then the higher we go is as if we're not taking action and we're emitting carbon as is. So this presentation is going to focus on RCP 4.5, which is the moderate scenario science really likes to hone in on. And this is the scenario where emissions peak around 2040 and then decline, which I think the world has a really realistic opportunity to fall through with this scenario, actually. That one seems doable in my humble opinion. And then there's RCP 8.5, and this is the other scenario science really focuses on, and this is the highest emission scenario where emissions continue to rise throughout the 21st century. So essentially that one, we're not taking action, the world just kind of continues as is. So worst case scenario, and then the scenario that seems most realistic, that's what I'll be focusing on. So let's give a little layout of the land. I know this series has been going on for a while, so you've probably heard of most of these, but just in case you haven't, I'm just going to go through them fairly fast. But Minnesota, especially the St. Croix watershed area, and frankly, the world as a whole, is going to be facing warming temperatures, especially winter and overnight. I think it's a common misconception that the world is going to warm, all at once or all at the same time or during the same seasons, but that's not necessarily true. In Minnesota, the winters are warming faster and the overnight temperatures are warming faster than daytime temperatures or summer temperatures. So that's something interesting to consider. We're going to experience extreme precipitation swings, so we'll be experiencing more droughts and more floods, which I'll go into how that makes sense a little later, but we're just going to have more extremes when we do have these precipitation events. We're going to have reduced ice cover and shortened ice duration. We saw that a bunch this winter, so I don't need to explain that one very much, but that's likely to continue. We're going to have a longer growing season. Hardiness zones are likely to move north. Well, they already have, and then we have increased invasive species pressure, longer allergy and tick season, and then a bunch more impacts. So those are just kind of the main ones that come to mind when I think of climate change and our watershed. So I'm going to show you this cool map. Some of you have already seen it before, but this is probably my favorite map in all of climate projections. This is one that I think really just puts it in perspective, but essentially what it's saying is Minneapolis. Minneapolis in 2080 is likely to look like modern Kansas, Kansas City in 2080. right? So that's kind of just showing you like what the future might look like in your area. And so in the scenario where the world doesn't take action, so RCP 8.5, Minnesota might look like modern day Kansas. In the scenario where Minnesota does, like where the world takes action, we tried to reduce our climate impacts. Minnesota might look like Iowa by 2080, right? So kind of that resembles our decline of these scenarios. So just really now, I've never been to Kansas City, but it makes me want to visit to see what we look like if we don't take action. So diving in a little bit to these regions, we've got these warming temperatures. These are fantastic maps made by Minnesota Climate Action Partnership. So essentially what these maps are saying is Minnesota is getting hotter. That is not a surprise to most of us, I'm sure. And the Wisconsin map looks an awful lot like this. Those are available as well. I just didn't include them in this presentation, but if you need them, let me know. But essentially in summary, so from 1981 to 2010, so a roughly 30-year time span, this is kind of what the climate looked like. We had like 5 to 10 days per year over 90 degrees. Then we have the same maps for a different 20-year time span, right? So 2040 to 2060, so only 20 years from now. And we'll be going from that 5 to 10 days per year to roughly 20 to 30 days per year or 25 to 40 days per year. So that's over a double increase, and in some cases a triple increase in days per year warmer than 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And I know in Minnesota we love our cold temps, so this is particularly jarring to me at least. Then we have precipitation swings. So these are days per year with more than 1 inch precipitation. So in the same vein of thought, so same time spans, Minnesota will be going from roughly 3 to 8 days per year with rain over 1 inch, which you can see here in these blue sections. And then in both scenarios, we're going to be moving to roughly 3 to 9 days per year. So that's a pretty similar outlook. We're just going from 3 to 8 to 3 to 9 with over 1 inch of rain. And I just want to reiterate that although not everything will change drastically, this map doesn't show when the rain will fall, so this could be a much bigger impact than it sounds just on the slide itself. But I just think it's really cool to see that not everything's going to change a whole bunch. Like the colors, these maps all look fairly similar despite their large time span. So, and since I know a lot of you work in water resources, I provided a couple extra maps about precipitation swings, which we will see right here. But this one's really cool as well, provided by the same organization, Minnesota Climate Adaptation Partnership. And this provides the observed change in precipitation from 1950 to 2021. So this is the past 70 or so years, and is showing how our precipitation has changed during that time. So this kind of really shows that climate change is already happening and will continue to happen. But from what we can see here in the little summary that I provided at the bottom, the St. Croix watershed's already experienced an increase in precipitation. And you can see it especially has in the fall and winter where you have these much darker blue colors. There's these little asterisks that show it's a statistically significant trend, which basically just means this is a large change, whereas in spring and summer, it may not directly be due to climate change is what it's saying. But it would be interesting to see these maps over time, especially in spring and summer, as they continue to change as we get more data. So yeah, really cool maps. I included one more precipitation map, and then we'll move on to another topic here. But this is just another interesting map that I thought was really cool, but this is summer precipitation swings. So here we're looking at the change in precipitation in summer in the high emission scenario. And this is for mid-century and end of century, so 2 different time spans. You can see that there's really not a lot of change for summer precipitation in mid-century. And then over time, we're going to start having more changes toward the end of the century. And yeah, I just thought this was interesting because in the previous map, these colors were actually kind of flipped. So the big takeaway I had from this is historical trends don't necessarily correlate to future trends. Like it seems like for these specific maps, there's almost like a turning point where it was getting from wetter to drier and etc. So just really interesting to see where these changes are going to be happening and where they won't. But so yeah, if you think these maps are as interesting as I do, please feel free to check out more. There's this awesome gallery called Future Minnesota Map Gallery. On that website I was talking about, Minnesota Climate Adaptation Partnership, which I have linked in this presentation. So please check that out after this presentation or shoot me an email and I can direct you to any maps that you might be interested in. So now that we're done talking about precipitation, let's move in a little bit to growing season. This is one I feel like a lot of people maybe don't think about, but it's really important. So there's this really cool app that shows where it's going to be, how growing season is going to change throughout the entire US. And so I've got a little video that's showing a sliding scale. And what these colors mean, because the legend's kind of confusing here, is we're going from a growing season that's roughly like 2 to 3.5 months per year, depending on where you are in the two states, right, in Minnesota and Wisconsin. And over time, so toward the end of the century, we'll be having a growing season of roughly 3.5 to 6 months per year, which is, again, nearly a double to almost triple increase, depending on where you are in growing season length. And this has cascading impacts, of course, because we live in a very heavily forested state that relies a lot on our natural resources, and growing season directly correlates to those resources in just our economy as a whole. So really cool stats that will play a huge impact on the plant ecosystems, especially we have in Minnesota and Wisconsin. So very related, but not quite the same, is we have plant hardiness zones. So the best map for this is this one down at the bottom. I hope you all can see my cursor, but this map that shows the purple and the blue colors on the Minnesota, for the state of Minnesota. And essentially what they're showing is the different plant hardiness zones. So each color represents a zone. And these zones are characterized by minimum, extreme winter lows. So the very coldest that it gets in the winter. And these plant hardiness zones are quite important because they determine what plants can live in what areas. So you can see in the third photo, that's my CSA from last year. So I actually got all those plants, which is awesome. And depending on where I live in Minnesota, some of these plants wouldn't be able to grow. So yeah, it's just a big determiner on where these plants grow and what insects can live as well. I have a really cool map, same map as last one, but shifting hardiness zones is just shown again right here, another sliding scale. And what this map is showing, you can see how it goes from heavily blue to very heavily green in our region. So what this map is showing is we're in hardiness zones 5A and 4A. So that's the blue right here. And then in the high emission scenario, we're going to be changing to zones 6 and 7. So if we want to recall back to that map in the very beginning, where we were looking at Minnesota compared to Kansas City, I just want to show on this map, the current green areas is Kansas City and Arkansas. So this is just another map kind of reiterating the fact that if we don't take action on climate change collectively, and make big changes, then Minnesota could look like that Kansas City, like current Kansas. So yeah, I'll be taking a vacation there after this presentation. I think I've convinced myself after this. So, but yeah, so just another cool map. And then again, what they're summarizing here, right, is so the minimum temperature in these cold ranges is roughly the -30s in Fahrenheit. And in the future, our minimum temperatures might be 0. We might not even hit the negatives, which plays a huge role in things like emerald ash borer and other insects and plants that really rely on these minimum temperatures to keep them away, frankly. So. And then last map is farm crop yields. I know some people in this presentation have seen this already, but this is another really cool map. I'm going to say that about all the maps because I'm a nerd for these things, but farm crop yields are expected to increase in Minnesota and Wisconsin, at least according to this map. Perhaps we'll see otherwise in the next presentation, but in this map, they're predicted to increase, and this is likely due to that longer growing season and more favorable winter temperatures within Minnesota. And the reason I like to show this map is because it sounds good, frankly. Increased farm crop yields, that sounds good for the economy, it sounds good for the plants and for the farmers. And I feel like in the world of climate change, we're always thrown so many bad things. We're told, oh, it's going to get hotter, the world's going to melt, blah, 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 all these bad things. But I want to say that not everything is bad or good with climate change. It just depends on who you're talking to and what you do. So yeah, it's just gonna be different. It's just a very different world from what we see today. And yeah, it's all connected. So we've got, this little girl, she's got allergies. I've got allergies. That's supposed to get longer with our longer growing season. They're supposed to get different plants, invasive species, different diseases in our region. Tourism is changing and is likely to continue changing as our winters become warmer and our summers become significantly hotter. And then, of course, we've got where people live as well. We might be experiencing an influx of people migrating to Minnesota as well. And this area has been designated a climate heaven in the US, where essentially climate change is not supposed to hit us quite as hard as it is in, say, California or Florida that have a sea level rise and more extreme weather events, you know? So we might have people immigrating here from different states. So yeah, all connected. It'll be interesting to see how the world changes over the next 100 or so years and longer. So I don't know if that left you being filled with hope or anxious. Hopefully not the latter, but in case it did, this second part of the presentation is for you. There's still hope. That's why I'm in this job right here, is because I personally feel like there's a lot we can still do to take action on climate change. And I'll go into that in a second, so stay tuned. But just mainly two main categories that all of our actions fall into, right? So in the climate world, you can usually do either mitigation, which are actions that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So this would be something like switching to renewable energy, or like solar panels, where you're actively not emitting carbon in place of, say, gas where you were. And then there's adaptation. So these are actions that plan for and respond to climate change. So these are the actions that are saying, okay, climate change is happening. I know that there's nothing we can do that will change the fact that it's happening. So let's plan for it now so we're ready for it as it gets more severe in the future. So our actions kind of fall into both those categories. So let's talk about mitigation. This is one that is probably what comes to mind when you think of climate impacts. Well, yeah, when you think of climate actions. So I'm just gonna take a little sip of water here and then we'll get into this. But when you think of mitigation, a lot of times it comes down to lifestyle choices. So I'm not going to take this slide and say this will fix climate change, because it will not, but I do believe in the power of small actions. So I'll go into this a little bit about what we all can do on an individual basis. And then a lot of the presentation later will be maybe what we can do with our organizations on a slightly bigger basis. So, but all of us can do these. So this will include things like shopping local, or just shopping at the nearest place you can go. So these would be going to your farmers markets, engaging in CSAs, shopping at a local co-op. This is really accessible in, say, a place like Stillwater that has those farmers markets and a co-op, and CSAs available. So with this being a Washington County focused district, focused presentation, I do hope we all can engage in that action. There's reuse. I keep thinking of Stillwater right now, but this is garage sales, antique shops, thrift stores, and those are all fairly accessible in this region of the watershed as well. But this is a great way to keep things within our society without having to continually create new items. So you're kind of avoiding all the emissions that comes with manufacturing and all of that, and also giving a new life to discarded or unwanted things, right? I love reusing things. Donating things is another action for just mitigation, right? So keeping things out of the landfill is so important when it comes to climate change. I think we would solve a lot of our problems if we just kept more things in mainstream society and out of a landfill. So, and there's a lot of stats that go into like how important that is, but I don't have those in this presentation. So saving on trips. This is another just easy one we can all do. Just when you go into the cities, maybe pack in a couple more errands than you would. Otherwise, there's create green space. So if you've got property, I recommend trying out pollinator gardens or getting a rain barrel or composting or just doing something to kind of connect with the land and just putting, plants on your landscape, especially native plants. So there's ride sharing, which I understand is kind of difficult in Minnesota, frankly, unless you're directly in the cities. But when that's an option, I recommend taking it, especially because transportation is such a huge emitter of carbon for the US. It's one of our bigger sectors for carbon emissions. There's creative cooking. This is a really fun one for me, at least. Food waste is another huge emitter of carbon, and I feel like a lot of the US doesn't really fully know that. But there's the stat that says like 40% of food is thrown away. 40% of like perfectly fine food is thrown away. And if we all just got a little more creative with our cooking, we could probably take a big hit to that stat and reduce a lot of the emissions that are associated with it. Then we've got getting outside, so physically unplugging. There's advocating. That's probably one of the biggest actions I could recommend to you all, is just advocating for climate policy and voting for people who are pro-climate. That's a very big one that I feel like isn't talked about enough. Renewable energy is becoming more popular, so looking into that, and perhaps like EV cars or solar or wind, all of these are getting progressively cheaper. So just checking those out every couple of years maybe, and seeing if there's new options for you. And then one of the last things I'm going to recommend is just start the conversation. So I know a lot of us here today probably have, you know, coworkers or families we go and we sit down with at the end of the night, right? And so one of the best things we can do when it comes to climate is just starting the conversation and kind of integrating climate change into our, you know, current day society. So I implore you to talk to your coworker on your lunch break, or talk to your family at dinner, or just talk to someone about this presentation. Like, use this presentation to start the conversation, please. So, and then just see where it goes, and, you know, see how other people feel about climate, because obviously if you're here, you care about it too. So, and then get creative. So I just want to throw this out there, but people have so many skills. I'm so impressed with people as a whole. And one of my roommates actually is currently working on this really nifty project where she likes to crochet. And so she's creating a temperature blanket right now, where every day she makes a new row on this blanket that correlates to the temperature of the day. And by the end of the year, she's going to have this huge blanket that shows the climate of Minnesota over the past year. Just a super cool project, a very easy way to start the conversation. It also creates a very functional object, but like just a really neat way to interact with climate change without you know, without it being super expensive, and by using skills you already have. So yeah, get creative. There's a lot of ways we can all take action in our own way. This is another really awesome option that I just want to pitch. So this is land stewardship. This is something a lot of us can do if we own property, but you don't necessarily have to own property. I rent and I still do a lot of these actions, but you know, it depends on the person. But some things I do want to recommend, right? So there's restorative land use. So this is a good way to reduce our carbon emissions, right? As we put in rain gardens, we invest in native landscaping, or put in pollinator habitat. These are all great ways to kind of help out the environment, especially as it's getting more stressed. So the environment's going to need a little more help over the next, you know, century or so. So anything we can do to help them out is incredibly important. I think a lot of us have probably heard about the Lawns to Legumes program, but that's a really great one to get involved with if you're interested in putting pollinator habitat on your property. And then we also have a couple other programs that are a little less mainstream, but there's permanent land protection options. So there's a fee title acquisition and conservation easements people can look into to permanently protect their land. This is really important in the respect that it protects properties from being developed. And so you have forests then that are continually emitting carbon forever, which is just a really powerful tool in the mitigation side of climate change. So, and then there's of course carbon credits too, which is kind of an up and coming field and is continually getting better and better. But there's a program called the Family Forest Carbon Program that landowners have been starting to get enrolled in, that pays them to preserve their land in such a way that sequesters more carbon, so sucks in more of that carbon, right? So yeah, there's lots of options for people, especially if you own land, to directly take action on an individual basis. But there's also a million other ways to get involved, even if you don't own or steward land. So I hope mitigation was fun for you all. Adaptation is a little different, but still has some really cool, nifty options for us all to take action on climate change. So let's get into that. Okay, so when I think of adaptation, there's usually three main options that come to mind. So there's this really cool framework that goes by resistance, resilience, and transition. I'll have more slides on this in a minute, but essentially the main options you can take is you can do resistance. So essentially you take action and you use your resources to reduce the impacts of climate change and kind of keep whatever area you're thinking of in its current condition. There's resilience, where you accommodate some degree of change. And then there's transition, where you just intentionally take whatever system you're looking at and change it so it's like prepared for the climate of the future. So I'll go into that a little deeper in a second, so I won't go too much in on that particular slide, but here we've got resistance, which summarized real short is just protect from change. So the example I like to use here is you would use your resources, say in your workplace or in your individual life, to place, maybe an easement on source water. That's a good example, right? So you'll use your resources to place an easement on source water. And then over time, you would need further resources to continue to preserve that area, right? So that's just a good example, right? So you take, I don't know, the source water location, put in their time, your money, your resources, and then as the climate gets warmer and it gets progressively harder to manage that area in the way you like, it'll take more resources, but it's still an option you can take. It just gets riskier over time. So yeah, that's resistance. You can protect things from change. It just takes resources. So. Then there's resilience. So this is kind of like the middle ground. So you're not necessarily firmly protecting it from change, but you're also not changing the system to fit future conditions. You're kind of just promoting the system's ability to rebound as changes are thrown its way, right? So an example of this, as shown in the photos here, is you could remove stressors from an ecosystem to promote its ability to deal with change. So here I've got a prairie, which is a fire-dependent ecosystem. You could remove the invasive species, perhaps by doing, say, a prescribed burn. And then the prairie will come back years later with ideally less invasive species and will be stronger because of it, because it is a fire-dependent system. So this is kind of an option where you manage an area in such a way that makes it stronger so it can handle any changes that are thrown its way. Another example for water resources is you could design culverts with future climate conditions in mind, right? So this is just like a small change you can take now that makes it ready for the future. And you could promote the ability of, say, wetlands to rebound if you have something like that in place. So another really awesome example I love is you can use diversity to improve resilience. I will pitch this for the rest of my life, I think, but it's just so important. But yeah, don't put all of your eggs in one basket. One of the things with climate change is, although we have all these projections, we don't actually fully know like how it's going to play out, like how accurate these projections are until they actually occur in real life, right? So the best thing I can say is, use the data we have, look at these projections, but don't put all of your eggs in one basket. Please, like, look at multiple management options or multiple management options as you're kind of making decisions in your job or on your property. So a good example of this, right, is we've got a forest. There's all these different species in it. What you wouldn't want to do is just plant like a couple of these species, because there will be climate change winners and losers. So you would want to plant a bunch of different species, say all of these. We can't predict the future perfectly, but we can predict that more diverse, say, ecosystems will be better suited to surviving and thriving. So if you do have, say, your own property, I would encourage diverse species, sizes, and ages. Because over time, maybe some of those won't do well. Like we might lose, say, our elms and ashes, but if you planted a diversity of trees on your property or in your town, then you would still have some winners left over as the climate continues to change. So then the last kind of adaptation option we have is transition. So this is actively encouraging change. And the best example I have for this is one that we're currently living, but as a lot of us might know, the ash trees in Minnesota are not doing so hot as a result of emerald ash borer. Emerald ash borer is taking out 99% of the ashes. And so what people could do, if they're following the transition approach to climate change, is they could cut down the ashes, or at least all the sick ones, right? Cut down the ashes before emerald ash borer hits them, and then plant something like white oak in its place, right? So white oak's expected to do well with climate change. So you could just change the ecosystem you have now, and just start planting things you know will do well in the future, or are projected to do well in the future. So that's one example of transition. Another one would be, say, looking at flood projections for your town, and seeing that certain areas of the town are expected to flood more. So what you could do is remove gray infrastructure before all that flooding happens and implement green infrastructure. So putting in, those rain gardens and whatnot, and taking out some of, maybe the empty abandoned parking lot space, something like that would be an example of transition. So yeah, those are kind of like the three main options people tend to take when they're thinking of adaptation. Oh, forgot I had a little graphic there. If you're looking at planting trees, I just want to pitch these two resources really fast, but there's the Climate Change Atlas, which has a series of tree species. And then the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources has best native yards for changing climate. There's so many resources that exist, especially for this specific topic. So I'd recommend checking these out if you have any trees that you have to deal with in your work or in your life. So really, really, really useful. There's also a climate change atlas for birds. If you're interested in birds as well, you can see which ones are going to do well in the region, similar to trees on this resource on the left. So, and then the last kind of section I have here is just best general practices. So this isn't necessarily mitigation or adaptation. This is just things we all can do in our individual lives to continue taking a fight and taking a stand on climate change. So my best advice is getting involved. And a lot of these are somewhat water related, but here, some of the best newsletters I've seen that kind of hit on water resources and climate change is this one called The Drop by Northern Central Region Water Network. It's kind of a mouthful, but it has great resources and it does not spam your inbox. There's, of course, East Metro Water Blog, and I know Angie is on this call, so good job on that, Angie. This is her blog, and I was reading through. Yep, thank you. Great job on that, by the way, but that's a fantastic resource. So if you don't follow that, please follow that because she makes great work. And then there's St. Croix 360, which is always putting in just amazing articles related to the St. Croix watershed. And many of those are related to water resources and or climate change or both. So yeah, feel free to check those out if you're looking for more information as we get it. Then there's always volunteering. So if people are asking me about how they can get involved with climate change and they're interested in water resources, I would pitch them the Adopt a Rain Garden option if it's in their community. Otherwise, I'd just say, try putting one on your property if it makes sense. Then there's, of course, Adopt a Storm Drain programs, which, again, Washington County, you guys do so good with that. And then we have community plantings. So this would be, say, tree plantings, like in the photo on the bottom, where I'm very clearly struggling to plant a tree. But yes, so those are some volunteering options that allow people to get involved in these topics. And then there's community science. So there's CocoRA's, WAVE, water quality monitoring, and then Salt Watch. And these are all really cool programs where you can either monitor data on your own property of like precipitation data. So that's CocoRA's. You can monitor water quality through WAVE. And then Salt Watch allows you to monitor salts, right? So yeah, lots of really cool options for people to get involved via volunteering, community science, newsletters, etc. So, and that's a great way to continue the conversation. So earlier I was saying get the conversation started. This is a good way to keep it going. And then I do always love just to have a big old page of additional resources. So I'm not going to go into what these are or anything like that, but I like to just show people that, like, yes, we are here for my presentation and I'm trying to do a good job for you all, right? But there's only so much that I can share in my presentation. So there's just a million other resources we could all look at in our own jobs. So if there's something you were hoping to get out of this that maybe I didn't touch on, maybe one of these resources has it for you. I was just reading through the 2020 State Water Plan, Water and Climate, and that's just like the coolest resource if you work in water and climate, because it directly outlines things you can do in your job that will touch on those two topics and actually make a big change. So yeah, so feel free to check that out and check out all the other resources because I've looked through them all and I found them incredibly interesting and useful. So they've been vetted, but yeah, just know there's a lot more you can look at if you'd like. I lost the cool animation here. There we go. See, it's coming back or not, doesn't matter. Anyways, I'm just going to pitch staying engaged one last time. Sign up for those newsletters, continue to attend events, and just keep learning. That's some of the best things we can all do on an individual basis to take action. So So yeah, and you can do that through Wild Rivers Conservancy or through any of the resources I just pitched. But with that, I'd like to ask if any of you have any questions. I might not know the answers to everything, but I'll do my best. And then I have one last thing, but Wild Rivers Conservancy, I have like a little opportunity in case some of you need this or want this, but Wild Rivers Conservancy has a lot of programs where we get people out in the watershed. And one of the options we have for youth is water quality testing. And so if you're looking for water quality data, say pH, dissolved oxygen, nitrates, phosphates, turbidity, blah, 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 macroinvertebrates, Wild Rivers Conservancy has been kind of taking that data, but we don't have a project that uses it. So if you want that data or have any ideas for anyone who does need that data, please let us know, because we want it to go to good use if anyone needs it. So if that sounds interesting to you, my email is right above. Please reach out to me and I'll get you in contact with the right person. And with that, I will stop talking. See, there's 2 comments maybe in the chat, something like that. But yeah, feel free to ask me any questions. I'll stop sharing from here. Thank you.
Are you looking for any free-form questions? As you're giving presentations to the public, so I've encountered a phenomenon that people get just immediately like depressed and shut down when they start hearing about climate change, anything having to do with climate change. Have you discovered any way that seems to be more empowering or more able to resonate with people and keep them from doing that?
Definitely haven't found a silver bullet, but I am very aware when I'm doing my presentations that these projections do sometimes look pretty rough, I guess. It's not always very fun. So I like to just remind people that climate change is climate change, right? So it is not good change, bad change, it's just change. And it might be good or have benefits depending on who you are. Some of us might love that longer growing season, especially the gardeners, things like that. So there will be benefits that people see. And so I like to remind people that it's not all going to be wildfires and smoke and flooding and all that. Like it's a lot smaller in some ways than that. And I also like to remind people that there are opportunities to take action. This is not something that we can just passively sit by and watch. So if they do have that anxiety, there are ways to channel it into some, to take action and actually make a change. So just like to remind people of those 2 main factors. And then I see Pam has a wonderful question, so I'm going to read that out. So is there any resource that might offer cities and townships a guide to how development codes impact watersheds? And this is an awesome question that I do not have an awesome answer for, frankly. So if anyone else on this call does have a good answer, please call in right here. Do I think there's a resource? 100%. Do I know what it is off the top of my head? No. But Pam, I have your email, so what I can do is look for it after this and email it to you once I find it, because I'm convinced something like this has to exist. So I'm gonna write a note and get back to you. Okay, thank you. So Dan McSwain also, yes, also included questions. So I'll read that out for everyone and then think of my response. But so I alluded to this earlier about the differences to the RCP projections in climate. Where are you going to see the latest projections? For our area, I've seen Southeast Iowa and Kansas and Southwest Minnesota. So a lot of the projections I've been looking at have been from 2 main agencies. So we've got Minnesota Climate Adaptation Partnership does have a section on their website devoted to these climate maps. And so I left a link in that in the precipitation slides, and I'm under the impression that this presentation will be shared with all of you after this meeting. Perfect. So you'll have that link. I know there's a group called WIC-Wiki. So Wisconsin, oh gosh, Wisconsin something Initiative in Climate. Oh, I'm forgetting it right now, but Wisconsin also has incredible resources devoted to climate change that are not just for Wisconsin. That's one of the tricky things about climate projections is some places do it regionally. Well, they'll provide these maps for the entire country or just for the region. Some places provide it just for the state. But for every map I showed, I included a link of where I found it. So if any of those are of interest, please click those links. And then if you want additional maps, usually I just put in a Google search of like, you know, Wisconsin, so-and-so precipitation data, and then see what comes up. But usually you have to look at extension offices or universities that have these maps. So thanks, Dan.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Alexis. That was a great presentation. Maybe we'll move on to the next presenter. And if you have more questions for Alexis, I think you can feel free to throw them in the chat and she can answer them as we go along. Okay, thank you, Alexis.
Thank you.
Awesome. So next up, we have Teresa Opheim, Executive Director with Climate Land Leaders, and she will be sharing an introduction to Climate Land Leaders. Take it away, Teresa.
All right, thank you. And thank you, Alexis. We've used Alexis as a resource person, and that's been wonderful. All right. My name is Teresa Opheim, as she said, and I am originally from Iowa, long time Iowa person. In fact, inherited farmland of my grandparents that is in this fabric art up here. I'm the former director of Practical Farmers of Iowa, an amazing farmer-to-farmer organization. And I've worked for the Environmental Law Institute in DC, the National Sustainable Ag Coalition in DC, and in other places. So I'm heading toward the end of my career, and it is my great fortune to get to work with the people I'm working with now, the Climate Land Leaders. So we have about 140 people participating who own 39,000 acres plus, and they are in mainly Iowa, Minnesota. We just recently expanded into Illinois, and then we've got some on the western portion of Wisconsin, and we have just hired a Wisconsin lead who will be helping us grow in Wisconsin. So we grow pretty fast, so a month from now or so, we'll have very different numbers. So what we're really about is landowners using their land as a tool to not only mitigate climate change, but help us adapt and also increase soil health, preserve biodiversity, and protect waters. So we named the organization Climate Land Leaders, and that really, we're concerned about that, but then also we named it that because climate is such an immediate threat. The people we are looking for are, of course, those who own the land. There are a few nonprofits participating who control the land. And I would say a good potential climate land leader is someone who believes we are firmly in a climate crisis, but owns conventional corn and soybean land where they could be doing a whole lot more to align their values with their land ownership. We're very focused on a cohort model, so we're not like a public membership group. The cohort, so we're not looking to get to thousands or millions of members. We're looking for landowners who want to share with each other and learn and implement stretch goals on their land. So a lot of these landowners are non-operator landowners in the USDA definition, in that they are not relying on the land for their main source of income. But the group I work with are offended to be called absentee landowners, because they are very much far from that. Most of them are spending a lot of time on the land, planting trees, restoring prairie, restoring wetlands, getting farming tenants to plant cover crops and go no-till, diversifying crop rotations, all of the kinds of things that move us in the right direction toward using the land as true stewards. This is how they describe themselves when we asked recently. So these people are leaders, and this is a great example. Most of them have a lot of other organizations or interests that they have. This woman's name is Ruth Rabinowitz. She lives in Iowa and California and owns 4 farms. She's active in all of these groups. She brings information from Xerxes Society, for example, back to the group. You should check out this resource. So you should look for funding from Pheasants Forever, because they've got funding available right now. So that's what we're really looking for, is the landowners as leaders sharing the information that they know and that they discover. So our approach is really based on social impact research, which says that and Alexis alluded to this, and she did a great job of moving from alarming news to action. And essentially, if you present alarming news, most people shut down unless there's a way for them to take action. And so we do that. We provide them the alarming news, and also provide them a community of support where they can actually take action on their land. Also, we know from the research, and I would say the group Practical Farmers of Iowa is one of the best at implementing this. The best spokespeople for getting others to make change are those in your same group. So in our case, it's landowners, a lot of non-operator landowners, although there are a number who live on the land and also have income from the land, but they're the spokespeople for other landowners. And we also know that if you have a community of like-minded people, you're more likely to succeed in your conservation efforts. And if you announce publicly you're going to do something, and I'm going to show you some examples of people who've announced public goals, you are more likely to follow through. So this year I committed to planting 6 more species of prairie in my urban Minneapolis yard. And I also committed to giving away some of my farmland inheritance to a Native American group. And see, I just announced it, and I'm really likely to follow through, because otherwise I'm not credible. So we're really interested in getting the land use away from corn and soybeans. So corn and soybeans are not a climate solution. We have a lot of, especially USDA funding, going to climate smart, billions of dollars to climate smart agriculture. But what we really need to do, given the projections that Alexis presented, is get away from corn and soybeans, of which we do not need more, and move very quickly to perennial plantings, restoring any kind of natural area we can, and reducing any kind of agrochemical fertilizers and pesticides. Now, I would say that a lot of the climate land leaders do have corn and soybean land. A lot of them have conventional land. These are mainly I would say, Illinois, Iowa, southern Minnesota landowners, and it is difficult to move away from that, and we're just helping them make that transition. So here's some examples of some conservation goals. So this is a group of sisters who own land in Northeast Iowa. They live in Washington State, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Minneapolis. And this is what they did in 1 year alone, 2 years ago. Since then, they've done a lot of maintenance, a lot of other conservation, but this is the kind of transformation that we're really looking for. In 2023, we counted the climate land leaders did more than 180 conservation projects. Some of them were small, like find out what chemicals my farming tenant is using. And some of them were huge, like moving 120 acres from cropped land to perennials. Here's our board president. Her name is Meg Nielsen. She owns land in southern Minnesota. And last year, she took 50 acres of formerly cropped land that's now in permanent cover, planted a lot of trees. She knows she's not going to live to rest under the shade of those trees, she says, but she's a very determined landowner. So we also have a very strong policy component, and we work on mainly USDA funding and trying to get the Farm Bill, for example, to prioritize climate and increase the amount of money available for programs like the Conservation Reserve Program, EQIP, and CSP, Conservation Stewardship Program, anything that will help these landowners pay for conservation. We also have a lot of people in our coalition who are very interested in helping the next generation of people growing nutrient-dense food, fruits and vegetables, grass-based livestock, helping those beginning farmers get on the land. This is our policy co-lead. She farms in Northeast Iowa, and this is a field of Kernza. Here she's meeting with Senator Grassley from Iowa, his representative, telling him about what diverse agriculture can look like. And we also have a very strong social media component. This is Beatrice Camus. She's in Illinois. She has transitioned land from cropland to a perennial system. She's also a beekeeper. I love this picture. You see all the bees buzzing around here. We have an equity component as well. This is Brett Ramey. He is with the Iowa tribe of Kansas and Nebraska. This is a Native American nation that Iowa, the state, is named after. They were moved off of the land in the 1830s to Kansas and Nebraska, so that's why they're over there. He shared with us recently about their climate resiliency efforts. So we are really interested in this group of landowners sharing their resource. Some of these people are the classic land rich, cash poor. They own land that is in Iowa that's 13, 14, 15,000 an acre. So they have a lot of resources, and a lot of their resources are in the land. So how can we get them to share so that we can all thrive? Okay. So we focus on not only what we know about climate change in agriculture, but also on how do we activate others to take action. So this is from the Yale School program on climate change communication. And many of you have probably seen this. I bet Alexis has seen this so many times. But we've got a group of people, Americans, who are, there's nothing we can do to reach them, but they're only this 11%. We probably won't reach these folks either. But look at all these people who are alarmed, concerned, cautious even, who we can reach, and we are not yet motivating them to take action. The climate scientist, Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, says that doom equals denial. So those people right here and these right here, if these people don't take action and they think we're doomed, it's the same effect. as being in the dismissive category. So we're trying to provide an organization that does offer that opportunity to take action. We focus on active hope. So we are very interested in taking a positive but realistic aspect to what is an amazingly discouraging climate change scenario. And I know Alexis was really positive for good reason. But it is the parts of the country and parts of the world that are being devastated because of our inaction. And so we need to acknowledge that and do what we can. So we do have a climate land leader if she's still on the call, Pam Arnold. And Pam, I wondered if do you want to go off mute and say anything about what you found valuable? See if she's still here.
Oh, I'm here. Teresa, what do I find valuable about climate land leaders?
Yes.
Well, where do I start? First of all, to be among such committed, hopeful, active learners, active farmers, active landowners is absolutely bolstering. Most of us who own land and are working to do our very best to make changes on the land that will impact climate as well as biodiversity and all the things that, are part of that larger ethic, oftentimes find ourselves spending too much time alone. That's one thing about CLL, is that it's a wonderful community. And CLL is run by one of the most generous and smartest women that I've ever met, the woman that just spoke to us, Teresa Opheim, who is also incredibly inclusive and visionary. So any of you who are interested in the issues that Teresa just described, I really encourage you to join us. It is a broad conversation. It is an informed conversation. And every week, something mind-blowing is brought to our attention with a great, great honoring interest in Indigenous people and Indigenous practice, as well as other people who are really underserved with regards to agricultural programming and that kind of thing. So we're learning, we are getting bolstered to make the changes that we need to make. And we're also encouraged to follow our own convictions with regards to how we are expressing our concern by supporting others. So please join us. It's an actually fabulous organization. So thank you, Teresa.
Yeah, thank you, Pam, for joining us today. I wanted to mention a couple things that Alexis brought up that we want to expand on. So here's an example of what we're doing with the Indigenous knowledge that Pam just mentioned. So we're going to have a get together in Iowa, in central Iowa, in June. We're going to focus on what Western science is telling us about climate change. That's the information Alexis presented to you. And then we're also going to focus on place-based knowledge. A woman who is 75, who grew up in the area where we're going to be, who has seen all these changes since she was little. And so she's got a tremendous amount of place-based knowledge, as do all of you, that an observation approach, knowing a piece of land very well. So we're going to hear from that person. And then we're also going to hear from an Indigenous leader who's also on our board, just talking about taking a very long view to your land. We're going to focus just on 2050 because that's so far in the future for most people to even think about. It's mind-blowing. So and then a couple other just more practical things. So we a number of the climate land leaders have checked out carbon credit programs. I don't know of any who are in them. The ones who've checked out the forest programs have found the paperwork extensive and the payments very low. So we have work to do to make those carbon credit programs more attractive to landowners. And then we also have a lot of climate land leaders interested in permanent land protection. So we're interested in more federal funding for the federal program that helps pay for state and local programs in the easement area. But there's just a lot of interest in that and not nearly enough money available. So those are a couple other points. And I'd love to answer any questions or have any kind of discussion.
Just I please ask questions in a moment. Just to go off of that point real quick, Teresa, with permanent land protection. I didn't advertise it a bunch in my presentation because I wasn't sure how many people here have, their own land or what that looks like, right? But Wild Rivers Conservancy, the other half of my job that's not necessarily shown in the title is permanent land protection programs. So if that option sounded interesting to you and you live in Minnesota, please reach out to me because I do have I have partnerships with Minnesota Land Trust and Trust for Public Land for conservation easements and fee title acquisition programs. But even if those programs do not sound like your vibe, but you're interested in the idea of permanent land protection, I can also show other options that people can enroll in. So just wanted to throw that out there in case that piqued anyone's interest. Okay, now everyone asks Teresa questions. She's fantastic, and so is
That's
Climate Land
great,
Leaders.
Alexis.
Teresa, I have a question.
Yes, Pam.
How do people join Climate Land Leaders?
Oh, yeah. So a lot of people ask me, how did you find these landowners? And we've grown mainly by word of mouth. So a lot of us knew a lot of landowners, and then they knew other landowners. So if you are might be interested you can send me an email at Teresa, Teresa at climatelandleaders.org, all one word. And then we also have an info@climatelandleaders.org if you want to go on our website. We have a lot of information on our website about what we're up to. And so that's a good place to get a little more information.
How many members do you currently have, Teresa?
It's almost 140. I can't remember if I said 130 starting out. And like I said, we're interested in people who want to participate in a cohort. So there are a whole bunch of conservationists out there who kind of like to do it on their own, and this may not be the best fit because we're really interested in people sharing what they're learning and supporting each other.
I guess one question I have for you, Teresa, is kind of like, so you mentioned, my question is what's up and coming for Climate Land Leaders? You mentioned that you're going to be having that meeting in Iowa to talk about traditional ecological knowledge, which is fantastic. That's something I'd like to get more involved in as well. Aside from that, are there any meetings or big initiatives that's being worked on that wasn't captured in this presentation?
We have meetings, we have Zoom meetings 3 or 4 a month on various topics. They tend to be pretty practical, like how to handle brome. Pam. We have one coming up on pollinators. So, how to find funding for wetland restoration, all that, things like that. So they're pretty practical. So we have a lot of activity. Our goals are really to get as many perennials on the landscape as possible. And so we're increasingly focused on that. So I'm looking for funding to help the climate land leaders support their efforts. A lot of them are spending a great deal of their own resources on land restoration, for example. And they really could use the help to, for example, plant really high quality prairie restoration. We are very focused on the Farm Bill that's coming up, and also securing the Inflation Reduction Act funding, this huge pot of money that became available, that is starting to become available, making sure that we can keep that for conservation. So we're really focused on that as well. Just increasing our numbers and our impact, getting more media coverage and social media coverage. If you check us out on LinkedIn under my name, Teresa Opheim, or Facebook or Instagram, you will see all these amazing people doing wonderful work on their land, because we really focus on getting them the attention. So.
Thank you so much, Teresa. Does anyone else, before we wrap up, have any more questions either for Teresa or Alexis? Feel free to come off mute or put them in the chat, whatever works for you. Okay, well, seeing in here, oh, we got one in there. Dawn asked, are you familiar with the documentary Kiss the Ground? And if so, what is your opinion of it?
That for me?
I think so, yeah.
I have seen the documentary Kiss the Ground, and I think any attention, positive attention to regenerative agriculture is wonderful. And so I'm very supportive of it. I think a lot of movies, documentaries about regenerative agriculture fail to deal with the challenges. So someone like Pam knows how incredibly difficult it is to raise food for other people. And so I think we have to keep that in mind with those kinds of documentaries.
Teresa, before we go, I do have another specific question that might engage people in the audience. There are categories of interest and political orientation within climate land leaders. And I wonder if you could describe those kinds of areas so that people know that there's an option if they want to participate in a specific conversation. For instance, restitution, equity. So could you describe those areas of specific interest that might engage people's curiosity?
Yeah. So we have everyone is invited to our main Zoom events or our in-person meetings. We have about 3 in-person meetings a year. The one after Iowa will be in Wisconsin, associated with the Savannah Institute Conference. So everyone is invited to those, but then people choose whether they want to be part of some subgroups. One of them is policy. We think policy drives everything. So we think everyone should be active in policy and the political process, but a lot of people don't want to do that. So that's a subgroup. Then we also have an equity subgroup. And as Pam mentioned, these are the people who are really feel the need to examine why it is essentially white folks got all the land. And there's some grim history that we explore for how that happened. That's a subgroup of climate land leaders, in that not everyone wants to examine that. They don't just want to focus on conservation. And then a final group we have is an ecosystem services, measuring ecosystem services group. So it's interesting, in the agriculture area, the science on, for example, soil carbon sequestration and how it's not permanent, but how slowly it cycles or not, is an area of much uncertainty. So we try to present the research to that smaller group. We really want to dig into all the details. It's pretty difficult, unfortunately, right now to say if, for example, if I take 120 acres from corn and soybeans and plant it to prairie, what is the exact amount of greenhouse gas emissions reduced from that action? We're just not really there yet. There are a couple tools out there that help. So this particular group is interested in that. So those are the three subgroups. And then people kind of get together on different topics. So we have a legacy group, those who are trying to decide what to do with their land, permanent protection, or dealing with offspring who might disagree about how the land should be used in the future. All those kinds of very hard topics involving land ownership and legacy. Land is just so expensive for the amount of resources most people have. So it's a big part of their estate when it comes to that point. Anything I missed, Pam, as far as groups?
Well, there's also the opportunity to tap into, conversations about books that we're interested in reading. I mean, we're about to talk about
books and need. So we thank you for mentioning that. We've got people who are really interested in the arts. So we have book discussions, and we have one on Wendell Berry's The Unsettling of America next week. We have we discuss some movies. We end most of our calls with some kind of closing. That's a poem, for example. And that's a really important part of what we do.
Yeah.
That was lovely. Thank you so much again,
Yeah, you're
Lisa
welcome.
and
I'm gonna
Alexis
go
as
stick
well.
some prairie plants in the ground.
Oh, it's a great day for it.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. I just want to mention a couple things because Alexis said she has a lot of links in her presentation. It will be posted on our website next week, as per usual, on the Washington County Water Consortium website. But if you want to see it sooner than then, or really want to be able to access the links, just send me an email and I can share Alexis's presentation with you. Also, the agenda that we sent out has a link to the Climate Land Leaders website, which has a lot of great information as well. So if you want to learn more about that, you can check out that link. Thanks again, everyone, for joining, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You too.